A young couple was found dead, a shocking murder in a quiet town. In the quiet town of Graham, Pennsylvania, a picture perfect couple's life takes a horrifying turn. Brian and Beverly Moak seem to have everything: love, adventure, and a promising future. But beneath the surface of their idyllic existence lurked a darkness that would shatter their world forever. If you love diving into stories that unravel the unexpected twists of human nature, smash that subscribe button and join us. This tale of betrayal, violence, and a shocking investigation will keep you on the edge of your seat. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts as we uncover how a seemingly random encounter led to an unthinkable crime. Have you ever pondered the hidden depths behind the friendly facades of your neighbors? Beneath the surface of casual greetings and polite smiles, there may lurk unsettling secrets that challenge our perception of safety. Psychologists and criminal investigators agree that individuals with certain behavioral patterns, particularly those exhibiting psychopathic tendencies, pose a higher risk of potentially committing violent crimes. The story of Brian and Beverly Moak begins like a romantic novel, a tale of two souls perfectly intertwined. They were the epitome of a modern couple, deeply in love, financially stable, and sharing a passion for travel and shared experiences. Their relationship seemed crafted from the most idyllic of dreams, promising a lifetime of adventure and mutual understanding. Their journey together started in the spring of 2001 at a mutual friend's party. Brian and Beverly were college students whose connection was instantaneous and profound. From the moment their eyes met, an inexplicable bond formed, a connection that would rapidly transform from mutual admiration to an inseparable partnership that would define their lives. That transformative summer, they embarked on a significant milestone by introducing each other to their families. Both sets of parents immediately recognized the genuine nature of their relationship, appreciating how beautifully their personalities complemented one another. The young couple's enthusiasm and shared zest for life were evident in every interaction. Beverly was a multifaceted individual whose talents seemed boundless. A talented athlete, she excelled in baseball and track, demonstrating remarkable physical prowess. Her musical skills extended to guitar playing, and her linguistic curiosity drove her to learn multiple languages. Her radiant smile and magnetic personality made her beloved among friends and peers, creating a warm aura that drew people towards her. Brian embodied the spirit of an adventurer, perpetually seeking challenges that tested human limits. His passion for extreme sports like rock climbing, surfing, and diving revealed a personality that viewed danger not as a threat, but as an exhilarating opportunity for growth. Where others saw risk, Brian saw potential, a perspective that would ultimately define his extraordinary life trajectory. Brian embodied a philosophy of continuous personal growth, challenging himself to explore a new destination and acquire a unique skill annually. This relentless pursuit of self-improvement was a testament to his adventurous spirit. When he first encountered Beverly, their connection was instantaneous, a profound recognition of shared passions and complementary personalities that would form the foundation of their extraordinary relationship. Their romance was a beautiful tapestry of shared adventures. Together, they conquered mountains, carved through pristine snow on ski slopes, explored underwater worlds through scuba diving, and rode challenging ocean waves. Their relationship was not just a partnership, but a dynamic collaboration of two individuals who genuinely understood and supported each other's dreams and aspirations. Despite their deep connection, the couple deliberately chose to prioritize their individual goals. They were intentional about completing their education before considering marriage, demonstrating a mature and pragmatic approach. Brian continued his engineering work with a large industrial company, while Beverly pursued translation work and simultaneously pursued a second academic degree. The couple quickly integrated into their new community, forming connections with neighbors and establishing themselves as valued members of the quiet, close-knit town. Their life appeared to be following a picture-perfect trajectory of professional success and personal harmony. However, their idyllic existence would be abruptly and tragically interrupted. On Saturday, November 17, 2007, at approximately 8:00 a.m., Brian's friend Steven arrived at their home for a planned fishing trip. After repeated, increasingly forceful knocking yielded no response, Steven became concerned. Despite multiple phone calls going unanswered, he ultimately decided to leave, frustrated and unaware of the shocking events that had already unfolded within the seemingly peaceful residence. Stephen, already equipped with his fishing gear, harbored an increasingly unsettling feeling about Brian and Beverly's unusual silence. Brian was known for his reliability and punctuality, the type of person who would never simply vanish without communication. The absence of any response intensified Stephen's growing sense of apprehension. Returning to the property later that day, Stephen found the house equally unresponsive. Determined to understand the situation, he began systematically investigating the property's perimeter. Through the garage window, he confirmed their vehicle was still parked inside, a detail that only deepened his mounting anxiety. The seemingly mundane observation paradoxically suggested something was terribly wrong. As twilight descended, Stephen approached the living room window, straining to peer through the darkening landscape. The interior appeared disturbingly disheveled. Most notably, the television lay inexplicably face down on the floor. A large, motionless shape partially obscured by the room's shadows sent a chill through his body. Retrieving his fishing flashlight from the car, he illuminated the interior with trembling hands. The scene that confronted Stephen was a nightmare of horrific proportions. Two bodies, partially concealed by a blood-saturated blanket, lay motionless on the floor. A bare foot protruded from one side, while a lifeless hand was visible from the other. Overwhelmed by shock and terror, Stephen immediately contacted emergency services, providing a detailed account of his gruesome discovery while remaining near the property. When law enforcement arrived, Stephen became their initial source of information. He meticulously recounted the day's events, expressing profound guilt for not investigating more thoroughly during his earlier visit. Forensic investigators noted several peculiar details. The front door was unlocked but showed no signs of forced entry, a detail that would become critically significant during the subsequent investigation. Preliminary forensic examinations revealed a chilling narrative of violence. Brian and Beverly had been deceased for approximately 12 hours, their lives violently terminated by multiple gunshot wounds from a large-caliber weapon. Each victim had been shot 3 times with surgical precision, leaving no possibility of survival. The crime scene suggested a calculated and intentional act of violence, transforming their peaceful home into a tableau of inexplicable brutality. The crime scene presented a perplexing puzzle of calculated violence. Investigators were struck by the meticulous nature of the attack, which seemed to defy conventional criminal motivations. Notably, no signs of theft were present. Personal belongings, cell phones, and cash remained undisturbed, categorically eliminating robbery as a potential motive. The absence of defensive wounds or signs of struggle suggested the victims were either completely surprised or knew their assailant intimately. Forensic evidence painted a chilling narrative of premeditation. Blood drag marks revealed that the bodies had been deliberately repositioned after the initial attack, indicating a calculated effort to stage the crime scene. The perpetrators' attempts to clean up were clumsy, and ballistics analysis confirmed the use of a .22 caliber revolver, a weapon known for its precision and relative quietness. The forensic team determined that both victims were killed by the same weapon, likely by a single shooter. The unbroken door lock suggested a significant detail. Brian and Beverly had willingly admitted their killer, implying a level of trust or familiarity that would prove critical to unraveling the mystery. Detectives reconstructed a potential sequence of events that sent a chill through the investigation team. They hypothesized that Brian likely answered a knock at the door, recognizing the visitor and inviting them inside. In a moment of fatal trust, he may have turned toward the living room, presenting an unprotected back to the assailant. 3 precisely aimed shots struck Brian at close range, with one bullet's trajectory dramatically toppling the television screen, a haunting detail that would become etched in the investigators' memories. The theory of the attack's progression suggested a horrific chain of events. The noise of Brian's fall likely drew Beverly from the bedroom. Upon witnessing her husband lying in a pool of blood and the armed intruder nearby, her instinctive response was to flee. Tragically, she was cut down before reaching safety, with 3 fatal shots striking her back in the hallway. Her body was then deliberately dragged and positioned beside Brian's in the living room, a macabre final act of the killer's design. Forensic details revealed the crime's early morning timing. Both victims were still wearing pajamas, indicating they were attacked during the vulnerable hours of dawn. The precision, the apparent personal nature of the attack, and the complete lack of apparent motive transformed this from a simple murder investigation into a complex psychological puzzle. Investigators were left with a fundamentally disturbing question. What could drive someone to execute such a calculated and intimate act of violence against a seemingly perfect couple? The crime scene presented a series of perplexing contradictions that would challenge even the most experienced investigators. The assailant's actions suggested a complex psychological profile, simultaneously methodical and surprisingly careless. A large blanket partially covered the victims' bodies, an inexplicable gesture that raised more questions than answers. The cleanup attempt was equally puzzling. Bloody drag marks were smeared across the floor, indicating a frantic effort to conceal evidence that ultimately drew more attention to the crime. Forensic teams discovered a crucial piece of evidence near the crime scene: a plastic broom with a long handle, its bristles matted with dried blood. Interestingly, the perpetrator had meticulously wiped the broom handle clean of fingerprints, a detail that suggested both careful planning and a desperate attempt to eliminate forensic traces. The broom's purpose became clear. The killer had been attempting to erase bloody shoe prints from the floor, scrubbing with an almost obsessive intensity. The scene was a testament to a killer's conflicting impulses. Smudged fingerprints and palm prints decorated walls, furniture, and door handles, seemingly designed to frustrate identification efforts. However, seasoned forensic investigators knew that prolonged presence at a crime scene invariably increases the risk of leaving behind incriminating evidence. The killer's extended time at the location would ultimately prove to be a critical mistake. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On the blanket covering the victims, investigators discovered a partial boot print, subtle yet significant. Unlike the blood-saturated floor, this print was imprinted on a lightly blood-stained area, revealing a distinct tread pattern embedded in the fabric. The seemingly insignificant mark would become a pivotal piece of evidence in the investigation. Forensic specialists conducted a detailed analysis of the boot print, identifying it as belonging to a rare model of heavy-duty work boots with a distinctive sole pattern. Further investigation revealed a promising lead. A local construction company in Clearfield County had recently purchased multiple pairs of these exact boots. The specificity of the evidence dramatically narrowed the pool of potential suspects, transforming a seemingly unsolvable mystery into a potentially breakthrough moment. Detectives began systematically questioning employees of the construction company, their hopes rising with each interview. The boot print was complemented by another critical piece of evidence: a palm print found on one of the house's surfaces. What had moments ago seemed like an impenetrable mystery now felt tantalizingly close to resolution. The investigators' meticulous approach and forensic expertise had transformed seemingly random bloodstains and overlooked details into a pathway toward justice. The forensic investigation took an intriguing turn when the initial palm print failed to yield any matches in law enforcement databases. This absence suggested a perpetrator with no prior criminal record, someone who had never been fingerprinted by authorities. The blank search results added another layer of complexity to an already mysterious case, hinting at a potential first-time offender or someone carefully avoiding detection. Investigators initially focused their attention on Stephen, the friend who had discovered the bodies. His multiple visits to the crime scene and lack of an immediate police report naturally raised suspicions. Stephen's explanation was straightforward but potentially problematic. He had initially assumed Brian and Beverly were simply sleeping, which delayed his call to authorities. When confronted with his status as a suspect, Stephen responded with genuine shock and indignation, adamantly proclaiming his innocence. A comprehensive investigation methodically dismantled any suspicions surrounding Stephen. Traffic camera footage corroborated his account of spending the day fishing alone by the river, a location where he had no witness contact with anyone. Forensic analysis provided further exoneration. His fingerprints did not match those found at the crime scene, and gunshot residue tests on his skin and clothing returned negative results. A potentially critical breakthrough emerged during neighborhood interviews. Detectives approached Daniel and Jennifer Tabares, residents living across the street from the Mokes. Daniel, with his wife Jennifer at work, proved to be an unexpectedly valuable witness. He described hearing unusual sounds around 5:30 a.m. on the morning of the crime, noises he now recognized as potentially being gunshots. His curiosity had been piqued by these sounds, prompting him to look out the window. Daniel's observation added a crucial piece to the investigative puzzle. A white pickup truck had been parked near the Moakes house during those early morning hours. This seemingly innocuous detail represented a potentially significant breakthrough, a tangible lead that could connect the mysterious circumstances of the crime to a specific vehicle and potentially to a suspect. The white truck became an immediate focus of the investigation, promising to shed light on the dark events of that fateful morning. Witness Daniel Tabarez provided a critical yet frustratingly incomplete account of the morning's events. He observed two men exiting the Moakes house shortly after hearing loud, distinct sounds, potentially gunshots. The pre-dawn darkness severely limited his ability to discern precise details, but his observation represented a potentially significant breakthrough in the investigation. The presence of multiple individuals at the crime scene suggested a more complex scenario than initially presumed. Daniel's most substantial description centered on the driver of a distinctive white pickup truck. The man appeared to be approximately 40 years old, with a solid build and long dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. A mustache completed his appearance, and a tattoo on his left hand caught the witness's attention, though the design remained indecipherable. Despite the seemingly detailed description, the lead quickly grew cold. No other neighbors corroborated the observation, and the vehicle remained a ghostly presence in the investigation. Extensive interviews with Brian and Beverly's inner circle, friends, family, and colleagues yielded no connections to an individual matching the description. The white pickup truck's complete absence from nearby traffic cameras suggested a deliberate attempt to avoid detection. Investigators theorized that the perpetrators might have utilized secluded back roads through the dense woods, strategically avoiding potential surveillance. A county-wide alert produced no substantial leads, further shrouding the case in mystery. A potential breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source: Beverly's mother. During her interview with detectives, she recalled a troubling conversation with her daughter about a neighbor named Jeremy Flint. At just 22 years old, Jeremy had already established a reputation with local law enforcement for drug-related activities. His residence was notorious for hosting suspicious visitors, and neighborhood gossip painted him as a problematic and volatile individual. Initial attempts to locate Jeremy proved challenging. Determined to resolve the situation, Brian and Beverly took a direct approach. They visited Jeremy's residence, presenting a firm but polite ultimatum: return the stolen items or face police intervention. Their confrontational strategy, while seemingly reasonable, carried significant risk, especially when directed at an individual with documented connections to criminal activities. Jeremy categorically denied any involvement in the theft, flatly refusing to return the items or acknowledge any wrongdoing. In an unexpected twist, the missing belongings mysteriously reappeared in the Moakes backyard the following morning. The couple was convinced Jeremy had surreptitiously returned the items during the night, indicating a calculated attempt to avoid direct confrontation. Despite the apparent resolution, Beverly remained deeply unsettled. Her growing unease manifested in persistent requests for her husband to consider relocating, sensing an underlying threat that went beyond the surface-level incident. When law enforcement finally detained Jeremy for questioning, his alibi emerged as surprisingly robust. He had been out of town for nearly a week, visiting his parents in another state, a period that encompassed the time of the murders. Multiple witnesses corroborated his whereabouts, and surveillance footage from a local bar definitively placed him socializing with friends on the night of the crime. Forensic analysis further eliminated him as a suspect, with his fingerprints and palm prints failing to match those found at the crime scene. As the investigation stalled and potential leads evaporated, detectives returned to their sole witness, Daniel Tabarez. What initially seemed like a routine follow-up interview took an unexpected turn. Daniel's recollections suddenly became more detailed and specific, a development that immediately raised investigative suspicions. He claimed to remember additional details about the perpetrator's clothing and provided a vivid description of one man exiting the house, notably highlighting a distinctive facial scar. The sudden emergence of these new details created a complex investigative challenge. Daniel's shifting narrative introduced both potential breakthrough and significant doubt. Investigators found themselves carefully parsing each new claim, weighing the credibility of a witness whose memory seemed to be expanding and changing with each interview. The scar description, while intriguing, represented both a promising lead and a potential red flag, a detail that would require meticulous verification and corroboration. The unexpected evolution of Daniel Tabarez's testimony raised immediate red flags for the investigating detectives. His new detailed account contradicted his original statement that the perpetrator's faces were obscured by hoodies. A meticulous examination of the viewing angle from his window revealed a critical inconsistency. The early morning twilight would have made precise visual identification virtually impossible. The discrepancy suggested a potentially deliberate fabrication, prompting investigators to question not just the reliability of his testimony, but potentially his involvement in the crime itself. When confronted about the footwear evidence, Daniel produced an array of shoes, sneakers, boots, and dress shoes, none of which matched the distinctive boot print found at the crime scene. However, his increasingly erratic behavior and changing narrative continued to raise suspicions. Detectives recognized that his evolving story represented more than mere misremembering. It hinted at despite his father's attempts at rehabilitation, Daniel's criminal tendencies proved persistent. Each interaction with law enforcement resulted in minimal sentencing, creating a cycle of consequence-free behavior that seemingly reinforced his destructive patterns. His father's efforts to support him, including funding an expensive private rehabilitation program and attempting to secure steady employment, consistently failed to create lasting change. The pattern of Daniel's life became a tragic cycle of opportunity and disappointment. After being sent to Florida to live with his father, he quickly reverted to familiar behaviors, stealing and dealing substances within 6 months of his arrival. His father's final act was to send him back to his mother, effectively abandoning any hope of redemption. This history painted a complex portrait of a man whose life seemed defined by a persistent inability to integrate into conventional society, raising profound questions about his potential involvement in the Moakes murder investigation. Daniel's mental health had begun to unravel dramatically in the wake of his escalating dependencies. Within a single year, he received a schizophrenia diagnosis and was prescribed medication to manage his condition. Unfortunately, Daniel's relationship with treatment was deeply problematic. Rather than following medical advice, he would frequently mix his prescribed medications with alcohol, creating a volatile and unpredictable psychological landscape. The consequences of his untreated mental illness culminated in a horrific incident in July 1991. During a heated argument with his mother, Daniel's fragmented mental state erupted into uncontrolled violence. Without warning, he seized a knife and launched a brutal attack, inflicting nearly 30 wounds on the woman who had raised him. Her life was tragically extinguished at the scene, transforming a domestic dispute into a devastating homicide. At his subsequent trial, Daniel attempted to leverage his mental health diagnosis as a defense. He claimed that voices in his head had compelled him to commit the murder, presenting himself as a victim of auditory hallucinations. However, court-appointed psychiatric experts carefully evaluated his mental state and concluded that Daniel had been fully aware of his actions, rendering him legally culpable for the crime. The judicial system sentenced Daniel to 20 years in prison, a punishment that seemed substantial yet would ultimately prove surprisingly lenient. In 2006, he was released on parole, having served significantly less than his full term. During his incarceration, an unexpected personal transformation occurred. Daniel began corresponding with Jennifer Freitas, a woman who would become not just his romantic partner, but a crucial figure in his future trajectory. Upon his release, Daniel and Jennifer married quickly. They relocated to Graham, a small town where they hoped to start a new life together. However, this move was itself a violation of Daniel's parole conditions. Despite the legal restrictions, a combination of police negligence and administrative errors allowed him to resettle undetected. In a twist of bureaucratic incompetence, Daniel's fingerprints were mysteriously purged from the criminal database, effectively rendering him invisible to law enforcement. The investigation into subsequent criminal activities revealed tantalizing connections. Daniel had briefly worked at a construction company that had purchased the distinctive work boots later linked to a crime scene. Detectives recognized the potential significance but lacked concrete evidence to arrest him. Their strategy became one of careful surveillance and meticulous case building. On November 24, 2007, they orchestrated a calculated move, inviting Daniel to the police station under the guise of assisting with composite sketches of potential suspects, a trap carefully designed to draw him into their investigative net. Daniel approached the police station with an unsettling eagerness, spending nearly an hour meticulously crafting intricate portraits of entirely fictitious individuals. His enthusiasm for this creative exercise masked an underlying manipulation, demonstrating his ability to engage convincingly with authority figures while simultaneously constructing elaborate narratives. The detectives watched carefully, allowing him to perform, collecting subtle psychological insights into his character. During the session, an officer casually introduced the topic of fingerprinting, presenting it as a routine elimination procedure. Daniel's initial hesitation was brief, quickly replaced by a confident demeanor. He believed absolutely that no trace of his involvement could possibly exist at the crime scene. His self-assurance was a carefully constructed facade, hiding the violent impulses that lurked just beneath his controlled exterior. The conversation took a strategic turn when a detective mentioned the bloody handprint found at the Mokes' residence. Daniel's composure fractured momentarily, and he began constructing an improvised explanation. He claimed familiarity with the Mokes, suggesting innocuous reasons for his potential fingerprints being present. The officer's calm response, noting the handprint's bloody nature, was calculated to further destabilize Daniel's carefully prepared narrative. As the interrogation progressed, another detective skillfully redirected the conversation to Daniel's previous criminal history. Unexpectedly, Daniel began discussing his mother's murder with a disturbing level of detachment. He recounted the violent details with what investigators would later describe as a chilling enthusiasm, his smile revealing a profound psychological disconnect. His demeanor in that moment epitomized the textbook characteristics of a psychopathic personality, devoid of genuine empathy, almost performing his own narrative. While Daniel spiraled into his grotesque storytelling, forensic specialists were systematically comparing his fingerprints with those discovered at the crime scene. When the results confirmed a perfect match, the detective's strategic approach culminated in a moment of dramatic confrontation. Daniel's previously smug exterior instantaneously dissolved, replaced by an explosive rage that confirmed the volatility of his psychological profile. Before he could react physically, officers swiftly restrained him, placing him under arrest with practiced precision. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Daniel's resistance crumbled, and he began to cooperate with investigators. He presented a convoluted narrative of the events preceding the crime, describing a night of excessive drinking and substance abuse that had left him financially and emotionally depleted. His encounter with the bar staff, who had ejected him for being unable to pay his tab, seemed to have triggered a cascade of violent impulses. Most tellingly, he revealed a petty motivation for targeting Brian Moke, a lingering resentment over a tattoo service for which he now arbitrarily demanded compensation, transforming a seemingly mundane interaction into a potential catalyst for murder. In the pre-dawn darkness of an early morning, Daniel approached the Mokes' residence with a volatile mixture of desperation and anger. Armed with a revolver and consumed by his demand for money, he arrived at 5 a.m. when the world was still shrouded in silence and the couple remained unaware of the impending tragedy. Brian, disturbed by the unexpected and early intrusion, reluctantly opened the door to confront Daniel's aggressive demand for payment. Confusion and frustration marked their initial interaction. Brian, attempting to diffuse the escalating tension, refused Daniel's immediate request and suggested returning later when Daniel had sobered up. This diplomatic approach, meant to calm the situation, inadvertently triggered something far more sinister within Daniel. A seemingly innocuous remark from Brian as he walked away to retrieve money became the spark that ignited Daniel's murderous rage. In a moment of instantaneous and calculated violence, Daniel drew his gun and fired 3 devastating shots into Brian's unsuspecting back. The gunshots shattered the morning's tranquility, their sharp reports cutting through the quiet like a brutal announcement of death. The sudden violence transformed an ordinary domestic dispute into a horrific crime scene in mere seconds. The commotion awakened Beverly, who emerged to investigate the shocking sounds. Her horror was immediate and complete as she witnessed her husband lying motionless in a growing pool of blood, with Daniel standing menacingly over him. Recognizing the imminent danger, she attempted to flee toward the bedroom, but Daniel's ruthlessness prevented her escape. 3 more shots struck her back, ensuring her demise before she could reach safety. In the aftermath of the murders, Daniel's immediate response revealed a calculated approach to concealing his crime. He returned home and enlisted his wife Jennifer in a methodical cleanup operation. Jennifer's reaction was disturbingly pragmatic. She displayed no apparent shock or resistance to her husband's request. Together, they meticulously worked to erase evidence of their brutal actions, moving the bodies, covering them with a blanket, and using a broom to eliminate bloody footprints. Despite their careful efforts, they missed one crucial element: a single handprint that would ultimately prove their undoing. Daniel disposed of the murder weapon by throwing it into a nearby river, a move that would frustrate investigators for years. The revolver was never recovered, adding an additional layer of mystery to the case. As a result of his actions, Daniel Tabares received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Jennifer, claiming she acted out of fear, was sentenced to a mere year in prison for evidence.